He was a war-torn veteran, a man who came to the mountains of Redwood Falls seeking peace from a world that had forgotten mercy. But peace doesn't always come quietly. On one blizzard night, he heard a faint cry buried in the storm, a sound that would change everything. Beneath the snow, he found a wounded detective and her loyal German shepherd, bound and left to die. Beside them, a note written in blood. This is the end for those who don't listen. He thought his battles were over, but that night, the war came knocking again. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. Winter came to Redwood Falls, Montana, like an old, vengeful ghost, howling through the valleys, burying the pines under white silence, and freezing every unspoken thought between heaven and earth. In a cabin miles from the nearest paved road, Ethan Cole stirred his fire, listening to the crackle like a heartbeat against the storm outside. At 42, Ethan was a man carved by war and solitude. His face was all hard edges, a squared jaw shadowed by 2 days of beard, gray streaks running through his short brown hair, and eyes the color of rain-soaked steel. Those eyes once read enemy movements through desert storms and jungle fog, but now they read only the shifting flames of his fireplace. The war had left him with scars no one could see, memories that flared without warning, and an instinct that refused to rest. He told himself that quiet was survival, yet every gust of wind outside still made his hand twitch toward the rifle leaning by the wall. Beside him lay Shadow, his 6-year-old German shepherd, an ex-military K9 who had served alongside Ethan in their last deployment. The dog's fur was a blend of sable and black, his amber eyes alert even in sleep. A faint scar crossed his right flank, the mark of shrapnel that nearly ended him in Kandahar. Like his master, Shadow carried his ghosts in silence. He would sometimes wake growling in the night, as if chasing something invisible. But tonight, the old soldier slept lightly, ears twitching at each roar of wind against the cabin. Ethan stood, adjusting his wool coat, and moved to secure the last shutter. Snow hurled itself at the glass like an army of white knives. It was the kind of storm that erased sound, erased distance, erased people. He glanced at the thermometer by the window, -20 and falling. No one's out there tonight, he muttered to himself, the words more habit than belief. Then Shadow's ears pricked. The dog rose, tense, head turning toward the door. Ethan froze. The wind howled again, but beneath it, a sound, faint, human. A voice or maybe a cry swallowed by the storm. Ethan grabbed his heavy flashlight and pushed open the door. The cold hit like a blow. He stepped into the white chaos, boots sinking deep, the light slicing through curtains of snow. Shadow followed close, his breath visible in harsh bursts. For minutes, there was nothing but snow and silence. Then, near the edge of the tree line, the beam caught something dark. Too still to be alive, too small to be a fallen branch. Ethan's gut tightened. He advanced, muscles coiled, the old training taking over. What he found stopped him cold. A woman lay half buried in the drift, her body twisted awkwardly, wrists bound behind her with thick nylon rope. Her face, pale and bruised, was turned toward him, lips cracked and blue from the cold. She was dressed in torn tactical pants and a winter police jacket stained dark with frozen blood. A few feet away, a German shepherd, larger than Shadow, lay, motionless, its legs tied with the same rope. The animal's chest rose weakly, and a low growl trembled in its throat. Ethan knelt. "Easy there, partner," he said softly. The woman's badge was still clipped to her belt. Silver Ridge Police Department, Detective Claire Dawson. Her pulse was faint, barely there. He looked around and saw a folded piece of paper pinned to a tree above them, half iced over. He peeled it off carefully. The message was short, written in thick black marker. For those who don't listen. A warning. An execution order left to the cold. Every instinct told him to walk away, to let whatever this was belong to someone else. But the soldier in him refused. He cut the ropes with his hunting knife, lifted the woman into his arms, and whistled sharply. Shadow, move. The dog took the lead, breaking a path back toward the cabin. Ethan carried her through the blinding snow, his lungs burning, his coat whipping against him like a flag in a lost war. Inside, he laid her on the couch near the fire, wrapping her in a wool blanket. Shadow sniffed the injured shepherd, whose tag read Rex, then gently licked its muzzle as if calling it back from the edge. Ethan worked fast, checking Claire's vitals, rubbing her arms to stimulate circulation, feeding the fire with another log. "Stay with me, officer," he whispered. "You didn't come this far to die in my yard." As the warmth slowly crept back into her skin, fragments of her face became clearer. Mid-30s, sharp cheekbones under streaks of dirt, dark hair tangled with ice, and a scar near her temple that hinted at old battles. She wasn't the kind of woman who scared easily. Even unconscious, her expression carried defiance. Ethan knew that look. Soldiers, cops, survivors, they all wore it like armor. He sat back, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. The fire crackled. Shadow settled near the door, and Rex gave a soft whine before falling still. Ethan's mind began to spin. Who would leave a cop and her K9 bound to die out here? And why so close to his cabin, miles from any road? He poured himself a finger of whiskey and stared into the flames. The silence pressed against him like a question he didn't want to answer. Hours passed. The storm outside worsened until the cabin walls moaned under the weight of wind. Claire stirred once, murmuring something he couldn't catch. Just fragments, names maybe, and a number. Ethan leaned closer. "You're safe," he whispered. But her hand twitched in protest, as if safety was a lie she no longer believed in. When dawn began to edge the horizon in a faint gray glow, Ethan noticed movement by the window. A figure, small, bundled in snow gear, approached through the blizzard. He reached for his rifle but paused when he saw who it was. Olivia Brooks, the park ranger. She was in her late 20s, tall, wiry, with auburn hair braided tightly beneath her fur hat. Her green eyes carried that steady, no-nonsense calm of someone born to the mountains. Ethan knew her. She checked on the remote cabins every winter. Olivia stomped the snow off her boots as she entered, bringing a blast of freezing air with her. "Morning, Ethan. You weren't on the radio last night?" Her voice caught as she saw Claire on the couch, wrapped in blankets, and the wounded K9 by the fire. "What the hell happened here?" Ethan handed her the folded note. She read it, her expression tightening. "This isn't random," she said. "We've had trucks moving on the service roads lately. No plates, no permits. The sheriff's office brushed it off." She looked down at Claire. "Guess someone didn't." Rex lifted his head weakly, eyes tracking Claire's breathing. Shadow nudged closer, sitting beside the stranger dog like a silent guard. Olivia crouched to check Claire's pulse. "She's strong," she murmured, "but she needs warmth and rest." Whoever did this thought the storm would bury her. Ethan nodded slowly, jaw clenched. They miscalculated. He looked toward the frost-covered window, where the wind still screamed like a warning. Something old and cold shifted inside him, a familiar readiness he had tried to bury. He realized his peace was over the moment he stepped into that snow. And in that moment, as the storm raged outside and two loyal dogs guarded the wounded woman, Ethan Cole knew one truth. The war had found him again. This time, not in the desert, but beneath the frozen pines of Montana. The storm had eased by morning, leaving behind a world glazed in silence. The forest around Ethan's cabin shimmered like a cathedral of ice, branches heavy with snow and sunlight breaking through in fragile rays. Inside, the air smelled of smoke, antiseptic, and something else. Tension. Claire Dawson, now conscious, sat propped against the couch, her face pale but her eyes alive with that wary intelligence of someone trained to read danger. Her right arm was bandaged, and a deep bruise colored her temple like an ugly memory. She watched the fire flicker, as if trying to remember where she was. Across from her, Ethan Cole poured coffee into two metal mugs. His movements were methodical, deliberate, the same rhythm he used when dismantling weapons years ago. The war had left its discipline burned into his bones. He handed her a cup, his eyes scanning her expression for any sign she might fade again. "You'll need it," he said simply. Claire accepted the mug, her fingers trembling slightly. "You're not a ranger," she said, voice hoarse. Ethan gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No, I'm just a man who got tired of noise." Her gaze flicked toward Shadow, lying alert near the door, and then to her own dog, Rex, who was sleeping beside the fireplace, his chest rising steadily now. "He's a fighter," Ethan said, following her eyes. "So are you." Claire looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Name's Claire Dawson, Detective, Silver Ridge PD. I was undercover until things went wrong." At that, Olivia Brooks, the ranger, entered from outside, brushing snow off her coat. She carried a field satchel and a look of quiet determination. The sunlight caught her auburn braid as she closed the door. "The trail's clean," she said. "No tracks within half a mile, but that doesn't mean much in this snow." She set down her satchel, revealing a map, a notebook, and a compact first aid kit. Olivia was a woman of movement, each gesture practical, unhurried, learned from years of working alone in rough terrain. She had seen her share of mountain rescues, lost hikers, and frost-bitten corpses, but what she saw in Claire's injuries unsettled her. "Who did this?" she asked quietly. Claire took a slow breath. "A group calling themselves the Iron Serpents. At least that's what we knew them as. Smugglers, but not small time. Military-grade weapons, fentanyl, human trafficking. I got close, too close. Someone in my department tipped them off." Her voice cracked for the first time, not from weakness, but from betrayal. "They ambushed me 2 nights ago. Took my phone, my gun, everything. They shot Rex. I thought he was gone." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're saying someone inside your precinct sold you out?" Claire nodded. "Captain Harris. He runs the tactical division. I trusted him." She looked into the fire. "He was the one who assigned me to the case." Olivia frowned. "You're sure?" Claire met her gaze. "He knew my drop points, my contacts. Nobody else did." For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of the fire. Ethan rubbed his hand over his stubble, thinking, then this wasn't just a warning. It was cleanup. His voice was calm, but inside, the familiar pulse of readiness had returned. He hated corruption, the kind that used uniforms to hide rot. "If what you're saying is true, The law's already compromised, he said. You can't go to the station. You go back there, you disappear. Claire exhaled, her breath shaky. Then we start here. I need my evidence back. My phone had everything, contacts, shipments, drop locations. She turned toward him. You know how to track, don't you? He hesitated, then nodded once. Used to. Olivia spread the map across the table. There's an old service road that runs south of here. It's been closed for years, but I've seen tire marks recently. Heavy ones. Her finger traced a curve through the printed topography. It leads to an abandoned sawmill, perfect cover for storage or transport. Claire leaned forward, studying it. That's one of their routes. Harris mentioned shutting it down for safety concerns. Now I know why. Ethan grabbed his parka and gloves. Then that's where we start. Olivia looked uneasy. You can't just walk in there blind. He met her gaze. We won't. We'll follow the signs first. Snow doesn't lie. They moved out at midday. The sky was a dull pewter gray, the air brittle and still. Ethan led the way with Shadow trotting ahead, nose close to the ground. Claire walked between him and Olivia, her movements stiff but determined. Every few steps, she reached down to pat Rex, who limped beside her but refused to stay behind. The loyalty between them was something Ethan felt in his chest, a silent language only soldiers and dogs understood. After an hour of trudging through snowdrifts, Shadow froze. His ears went up, tail stiff. Ethan motioned for silence. The dog moved forward cautiously, leading them to a half-buried patch of disturbed snow. Ethan knelt, brushing away the powder. There, a faint impression of boot prints, not fresh but recent enough to hold shape. At least 3 men, he murmured. Heavy gear, moving east. Olivia scanned the tree line. That's toward the sawmill. As they followed, they came across another sign, a spent shell casing glinting faintly under a branch. Claire crouched, examining it. 9mm, police issue. She looked at Ethan. They have connections, all right. Nearby, Rex began pawing at something buried in the drift. Ethan helped dig, revealing a torn piece of industrial tarp marked with black chemical residue. Smugglers use this kind for sealing containers, he said quietly. Whatever they're moving, it's not just guns. The sky began to darken early, as if the day itself wanted to hide. Olivia checked her watch. We should turn back soon. It'll freeze solid once the sun drops. Ethan nodded, scanning the horizon one last time. That's when Shadow growled, a deep, warning rumble that vibrated through the still air. From the slope above, a figure appeared, bundled in camouflage winter gear. A rifle glinted in his hands. Down! Ethan barked, dragging Claire behind a fallen log. A shot cracked, kicking up snow inches from where they'd stood. Olivia dove for cover, returning fire from her service pistol. The figure moved fast, ducking behind a boulder. Ethan flanked left, Shadow low to the ground beside him. Another shot rang out, echoing through the frozen pines. Then silence. When they approached the rock, the man was gone, leaving only a trail of blood vanishing into the woods. Claire caught her breath, clutching her shoulder. They know we're alive, she said. Ethan glanced at the tracks disappearing into the trees. And now they know we're coming. He looked at the faint light of his cabin far below the ridge. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in a fight. The storm had brought him something he didn't expect. Purpose. As night settled, the group made their way back to the cabin. The air was colder now, sharper, the stars like shards of ice overhead. Inside, Ethan secured the windows and checked his weapons. Claire sat beside the fire again, staring at the flame's reflection in her coffee. "They'll come for us," she said quietly. Ethan met her eyes across the room. "Let them." He poured another log onto the fire, sparks rising like ghosts into the dark. "This time, we'll be ready." And outside, under the indifferent sky, fresh snow began to fall, soft, patient, and silent, as if it were listening to the promise of war being reborn. The night had buried Redwood Falls beneath a new layer of snow. The next morning broke quiet but tense, the kind of stillness that always came before violence. Inside the cabin, Ethan Cole methodically cleaned his rifle on the kitchen table, the scent of gun oil mixing with the faint aroma of coffee. His jaw was tight, his mind already rehearsing scenarios. Across from him, Detective Claire Dawson studied a hand-drawn map Olivia had spread across the table. Her hair, now dry and tied back into a rough ponytail, framed her pale face. The bruises along her cheek had begun to fade, but the haunted look in her eyes had not. She traced a circle on the map where the abandoned sawmill sat, isolated in the foothills, a mile from the frozen river. "If they're using this place, they'll have guards, maybe cameras. We need to move before they realize we're alive." Her tone was steady, professional, the voice of a cop who'd spent years making impossible calls. Olivia Brooks, the park ranger, leaned against the counter, arms crossed over her thick forest green jacket. Her auburn hair caught the morning light filtering through the frosted windows. "I know the terrain," she said. "There's a ravine behind the mill that's hidden from the main road. If we move through there, we can get close without being seen." She glanced at Ethan. "You'll need snowshoes. The drifts are waist-high." Ethan nodded, his eyes flicking toward the corner of the room where Shadow and Rex lay side by side, alert but calm. "They'll come," he said quietly. "The dogs stay low and follow commands." As they prepared to leave, Claire noticed Ethan's hand linger for a moment on an old photograph pinned above the fireplace, a younger man in uniform standing beside another soldier. She didn't ask, but she saw the flicker of pain cross his eyes. Ethan noticed her look and said simply, "Afghanistan. He didn't make it." Then he turned, grabbed his pack, and ended the memory there. The three of them moved out before noon. The sky was overcast, pale and heavy, pressing down on the forest like a lid. Their breaths rose in steady clouds as they trekked through the snow. The world was so silent that even the crunch of their boots sounded loud. Shadow and Rex padded ahead, ears twitching at every sound. The air smelled of pine and old smoke, faint but wrong, the scent of recent human presence. After 2 miles, they reached a ridge overlooking the sawmill. The structure below was a skeleton of its former self. Rusted metal roofs, broken conveyor belts, and a sagging loading bay buried under years of neglect. But the fresh tire tracks and footprints in the snow told another story. A black SUV and 2 cargo trucks were parked outside. Ethan crouched low, scanning through his binoculars. "At least 6 men," he murmured, patrol patterns sloppy, not military. Claire leaned beside him. "That SUV, Silver Ridge PD issue, unmarked." Her voice dropped. "Harris is here." Ethan's jaw flexed. "Then this ends today." They slid down the slope into the ravine, using the trees for cover. Olivia led, her steps precise and light, the grace of someone who'd walked dangerous terrain all her life. Her father had been a smoke jumper, she once told Ethan, a firefighter who died in an inferno trying to save his crew. Since then, Olivia had carried his old compass everywhere, believing it kept her from getting lost. Today, She clutched it in her gloved hand as they crept closer. Near the sawmill's rear fence, they spotted an armed guard standing watch. A broad man in his 30s, wearing a thick parka and holding an M4 rifle. His face was wind-chapped, his beard patchy. He had that impatient look of someone who thought himself invincible. Ethan motioned for silence, then circled behind. When the man turned to light a cigarette, Ethan struck, one hand covering his mouth, the other locking around his throat in a chokehold. The guard struggled briefly, then slumped unconscious into the snow. Olivia dragged the body behind a log. Inside, the sawmill smelled of fuel and damp wood. Crates were stacked high, many marked with faded shipping labels. Claire pried one open using a crowbar from the corner. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were bricks of fentanyl, weapons parts, and stacks of burner phones. Her breath caught. This is it, their distribution hub. She rifled through the papers on a nearby workbench, manifests, coded delivery routes, a ledger signed only with the letter C. Kane, she whispered, recognizing the name from her undercover notes. Suddenly, the sound of boots echoed from the hallway. Ethan motioned everyone into cover behind a stack of crates. Two men entered, one short and nervous with a twitching jaw, the other tall and wiry with a scar across his neck. They wore tactical vests, but no insignia. The tall man, Rico, spoke with an edge of authority. Kane says we move the shipment tonight. Harris will clear the route, no mistakes. His voice was low, his eyes darting toward the door as if expecting something. Claire clenched her fists. That's our inside man confirming it, she murmured. Ethan's gaze sharpened. We need one of them alive. When the two men turned their backs, Ethan moved like a shadow. In one swift motion, he disarmed the smaller guard, slammed him into the wall, and held a knife to his throat. Rico reached for his weapon, but Shadow lunged with a snarl, knocking him flat and baring sharp teeth inches from his face. The man froze, eyes wide with fear. Ethan's voice was quiet but lethal. Where's Harris? Rico hesitated, his breath fogging the air. He's upstairs, in the control room, with Kane. Claire's eyes widened. Kane's here? Rico nodded frantically. They're finishing the deal before moving everything south. Please, man, Ethan's expression didn't change. Hot, then you're coming with us. He bound the man's wrists with a cable tie and gagged him. They crept up the rusted stairway leading to the upper floor. The floorboards groaned under their boots. Through the glass window of the control room, they saw Captain Harris, tall, broad-shouldered, his police uniform replaced by a black tactical coat. His once charming face had hardened into something cruel, the eyes of a man long past redemption. Beside him stood another figure, Kane. Kane was in his late 40s, clean-shaven with salt and pepper hair combed neatly back. He wore an expensive dark coat that contrasted sharply with the filth of the sawmill. His face was calm, almost elegant, but his eyes were the color of ash. Dead, calculating. He was the kind of man who smiled when he killed. Move the trucks in 2 hours, Kane said smoothly. Once the roads are clear, Harris will make sure no patrol crosses the state line. By tomorrow, Redwood Falls will be nothing but a ghost town. Claire gripped her pistol. We take them now. Ethan shook his head. Too many variables. We hit them hard, fast. Then the floor creaked under Olivia's boot. Harris's head snapped toward the sound. Someone's here, he barked. Gunfire exploded, glass shattering as bullets tore through the railing. Ethan dove behind a pillar, returning fire. Claire rolled behind a console, her shots precise, taking down one of Kane's men. Shadow lunged at another who tried to flank them, sending him crashing into the steel railing. Amid the chaos, Harris fired blindly toward Claire's position. The shot grazed her arm, but she didn't stop. Ethan advanced, steady and ruthless, pinning Harris against the wall. "You were supposed to protect her," he growled. Harris's lip curled. "You don't understand. Kane owns this town." Ethan's answer came in silence, a sharp strike that sent the traitor sprawling unconscious. Kane, calm even in defeat, backed toward the window. "You've won nothing, soldier," he said, voice like ice. Then he dropped a smoke grenade, filling the room with choking gray haze. By the time it cleared, he was gone, vanished into the storm outside. Ethan looked out the broken window, snow swirling like ghosts in the wind. "He's not far," he said. Claire pressed a bandage to her arm, wincing. "Then we finish this." As they gathered the ledgers, weapons, and captured Rico, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. The sawmill stood silent again, but now it carried new ghosts, proof of corruption, betrayal, and a war that refused to end. The blizzard returned that night, roaring like a living thing, as if the mountains themselves wanted to bury every secret the sawmill had revealed. Inside the cabin, the fire hissed against the wind. Ethan Cole sat near the table, his face drawn and tense under the flickering orange glow. His knuckles were scraped raw, his coat torn at the shoulder. Across from him, Detective Claire Dawson worked quietly, sorting through the ledgers and documents they had taken from the sawmill. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now burned with grim purpose. The soft light accentuated the hollows under her cheekbones and the scar near her temple. Her hands shook slightly each time she touched a page with Captain Harris's signature. Betrayal wasn't new to her. It had ended her marriage years ago when her husband, a fellow officer, had falsified reports for money. But this betrayal was deeper, heavier. It came from the very badge that defined her. Olivia Brooks tended to the wood stove, her movements steady and deliberate. She had changed into a dry ranger's flannel, her auburn hair pulled into a rough bun, cheeks flushed from cold. Olivia had seen violence before, a bear attack that had taken her partner 2 winters ago, but nothing like this. The blood she'd seen at the mill wasn't the wilderness's doing. It was the mark of men. "They won't stay quiet after that," she said, feeding another log into the stove. Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at the map tacked to the wall, the sawmill circled in red. "Kane's gone," he muttered, "and men like him don't run. They reorganize." A knock shattered the silence. 3 quick raps, 2 slow. Ethan's rifle was in his hands before the third sound ended. "Stay back," he warned. Shadow stood rigid by the door, growling low, while Rex, still limping but alert, huffed beside him. Ethan unlatched the door an inch. Snow and wind burst in, and behind it stood a man wrapped in a heavy black coat, his hood pulled low. "Easy, Cole," the stranger said, lifting a gloved hand. His voice was calm, gravelly, carrying authority. "Name's Agent Mark Corbin, DEA." Corbin was in his late 40s, tall and broad with a lean, hard frame. His square jaw was shadowed with gray stubble, and his blue eyes carried the weariness of a man who'd spent too many nights staring into the worst corners of humanity. The scar that ran from his chin to his ear looked surgical, an old injury from a drug raid gone wrong. He removed his gloves, revealing rough, scarred hands. "You can lower the gun," he said evenly. "I'm not your enemy." Claire froze where she stood. "Corbin," she breathed. He turned toward her, surprise breaking through his composure. "Claire." His eyes softened with recognition and worry. "You're alive." He stepped forward, but Ethan's hand remained steady on the trigger. "He's with you?" Ethan asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Claire nodded. "He's my brother." The tension eased, if only slightly. Ethan lowered the rifle but didn't put it away. Corbin entered, bringing a gust of freezing air with him. He glanced at the cabin interior. The rifles by the wall, the blood-stained gauze, the documents spread across the table, and exhaled sharply. So the rumors were true. Harris flipped. Olivia offered him a mug of coffee, watching him cautiously. "You came through the storm alone?" Corbin nodded. "I tracked Harris for months, trying to connect him to Kane. Then you three blew their operation wide open." His gaze moved to Ethan. "You're ex-military, special forces, right?" Ethan didn't confirm or deny. His silence was answer enough. Corbin smirked faintly. "Figures. You move like one." They gathered around the table as Corbin unfolded a thin plastic sleeve of photos. Satellite images, intercepted messages, and one surveillance still showing Kane boarding a helicopter near the state border. "Kane isn't retreating," Corbin said. "He's regrouping at a facility south of Glacier Pass. Old mining tunnels, now modified for storage. It's where he keeps his chemical stockpiles." He paused, meeting Claire's eyes. "And Harris was supposed to meet him there tomorrow night." Ethan leaned forward. "Then we finish this before sunrise." Corbin shook his head. "You don't have the manpower. My team's 3 hours out, weather's grounding aircraft. If we move now, we go dark and quiet." Claire's voice hardened. "We don't have 3 hours. Kane has everything he needs to vanish again. Once he crosses the border, we lose him for good." Olivia spoke up softly. "Then we do what we can with what we have." She pointed at the map. "There's a back access trail, an old ranger route that runs near Glacier Pass. It's dangerous, steep, but it bypasses the main road. We could get close without alerting them." Ethan's eyes flicked to her. "You've been there?" Olivia nodded. "My father used to take me there before the fire. I still remember the path." Corbin hesitated, then finally nodded. "All right. But this is off the record. No backup, no comms." He handed Ethan a compact earpiece and a spare sidearm. "If we don't come back, this never happened." They set out before dawn. The snow had thickened again, swirling like a ghostly sea. The climb toward Glacier Pass was brutal. Wind screaming across the ridges, visibility dropping to mere feet. Shadow led the way, his fur dusted white, his steps sure and silent. Rex followed behind Claire, his limp more pronounced but his resolve unbroken. Ethan moved at point, cutting a path through the drifts with practiced efficiency. Claire followed close, clutching her rifle tight, her breath visible in the freezing air. Every so often, she looked at her brother ahead of her, the man she'd idolized as a child, the same man who had saved her from their father's drunken rages when she was 8. Corbin had always been the protector. Now she could see the weight he carried etched into his face, the toll of years fighting an endless war against poison. After 2 hours of climbing, they reached a cliff overlooking the valley. Through the haze of snow, faint lights flickered below, floodlights illuminating the mouth of the old mining tunnels. Trucks were parked in neat lines, men moving crates under tarps. Kane was rebuilding his empire right under the storm. Corbin raised binoculars. "There, Kane's SUV, he's inside the tunnel." Ethan checked his rifle, his expression carved from stone. "We move in pairs, quiet and clean." He pointed. "Olivia and I will flank left through the ridge. You two, take the drainage path down to the tunnel entrance." They split silently. The cold bit at their skin, each step crunching on fragile snow. Olivia kept pace beside Ethan, her breath steady, her gloved hand brushing the old compass in her pocket for luck. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" she asked quietly. Ethan gave a dry laugh. "Every day." She smiled faintly. "You don't seem the type to quit." "Neither do you," he said. At the tunnel's mouth, Shadow froze, tail rigid. A low growl vibrated from his throat. Ethan raised his fist. "Stop." From inside came the faint echo of machinery and voices, then a new sound, the click of a safety being released. Ethan turned just in time to see the flash of movement, a guard stepping out from behind a crate. The man was young, maybe 20, his face hidden under a balaclava. Before he could raise his weapon, a shot cracked from above, the echo splitting the night. The guard dropped instantly. Claire's voice came through the earpiece. "We're compromised. Move!" The storm swallowed the rest. They charged into the tunnel, snow trailing behind them like smoke. The air inside was metallic and hot from running engines. Lights flickered along the walls, revealing stacks of chemical barrels and weapon crates. Ethan moved fast, clearing corners with precision. Shadow darted ahead, barking once, alerting him to figures moving near the far end. A flash of gunfire lit the darkness. Olivia ducked behind a pillar, returning 2 clean shots that dropped one attacker. The fight was short but vicious, echoing through the stone corridors until only silence remained. When they reached the inner chamber, Kane was gone again. Only his voice lingered, recorded over a looping radio transmission. "You can't stop what you don't understand. The storm always wins." Corbin smashed the radio with the butt of his pistol, his jaw tight. "He's 1 step ahead." Claire knelt beside an open crate marked biohazard, her voice cold. "Then we burn his storm to the ground." Ethan looked around the cavern, the chemical barrels stacked like dominoes, and gave a slow nod. "Then let's light it." The first explosion tore through the tunnels like thunder under ice, sending fire blooming up through the snow-choked night. And for a moment, beneath the howling wind, it almost sounded like the mountain was breathing again. The explosion had turned the night into a fever dream of fire and snow. Flames leapt from the mouth of the old mining tunnels, lighting up the blizzard in shades of gold and crimson. Smoke coiled through the wind, twisting into the shape of ghosts before fading into the dark. Ethan Cole stood on the ridge above, chest heaving, rifle still clutched in his hands. His parka was singed at the edges, his face smeared with soot, but his eyes, those cold, gray eyes, were alive with something he hadn't felt in years: closure. Claire Dawson crouched beside a snowbank, coughing as she wrapped a torn bandage around her arm. The explosion had thrown her down hard, but she was unbroken. Her black hair was tangled and streaked with ash, but the look in her eyes was steady, fierce. The look of someone who had finally dragged truth out of darkness. "Is it over?" she asked, voice hoarse. Ethan didn't answer immediately. The fire reflected in his pupils, and his instincts told him the same thing his heart refused to believe. It wasn't. A voice crackled through the damaged radio at their feet. "This isn't finished, Dawson." It was Kane. His tone was calm, almost amused. "You've only burned my shadow. The storm moves where I do." The transmission cut out with a burst of static. Claire cursed under her breath. "He's alive." From below, Agent Mark Corbin stumbled through the snow, his breath ragged. His face was pale under the grime, and blood soaked the side of his jacket. A bullet had grazed his ribs. Despite the pain, his posture remained firm, the bearing of a man who'd learned to hide agony behind discipline. "Helicopter!" he gasped, pointing toward the tree line. In the distance, faint through the snow, the rhythmic chop of rotor blades echoed across the valley. "Kane's running north." Olivia Brooks checked her rifle and threw a look at Ethan. Her freckled face was flushed from cold auburn hair escaping from beneath her beanie. "If he gets over the ridge, we lose him to the border," she said. "We won't catch him again." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then we don't let him cross." They pushed forward through knee-deep snow, following the echo of the helicopter. The world around them glowed in flashes of fire and white, a battlefield of elements, heat and cold, light and shadow. Shadow and Rex, the two dogs, ran ahead, their paws kicking up powder, noses to the wind. Shadow's breath came in sharp bursts, but his eyes burned with purpose. Rex, though still limping, matched him stride for stride. They were soldiers again, tracking evil through a frozen hell. They reached the ridge as the first light of dawn began to bleed across the horizon. Kane's helicopter stood at the clearing, a sleek black Bell 429, its rotors slicing the air. Two armed men guarded the path, both broad-shouldered in tactical snow gear. The taller one, Victor, had a shaved head and a jagged scar down his cheek, his accent thick with Eastern steel. The other, Milo, was younger, nervous, his breath fogging as he gripped his rifle too tightly. Ethan read them like a map. Mercenaries, not believers. Men who fought for money, not cause. He gave a silent signal. Corbin and Olivia took the right flank, moving behind the tree line. Claire knelt beside Ethan, her gloved hand gripping his sleeve. "You'll go straight for him, won't you?" she whispered. Ethan looked down at her, a faint, weary smile crossing his face. "It's what I do." They moved. The first shot came from Olivia, clean, efficient. Victor dropped instantly, his body twisting into the snow. Milo panicked, firing wildly before Shadow slammed into him, teeth locking around his wrist, sending the gun flying. Ethan and Claire advanced fast, bullets cracking the frozen air. The helicopter engine roared louder. Through the blinding wind, Kane emerged from the cabin, tall and unshaken, dressed in a black wool coat now dusted with snow. His silver hair was slicked back, his face calm, almost elegant. But there was madness in his composure, a man too used to being untouchable. He smiled as he saw them. "You burned my kingdom, soldier, but empires rebuild." He raised his pistol, the gesture almost lazy, and fired. The shot grazed Ethan's shoulder, spinning him back. Claire fired in return, her bullet tearing through Kane's sleeve, but he barely flinched. "You think this changes anything?" he said. "For every man you kill, another takes his place." "Maybe," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "But not you." He lunged forward as the helicopter began to lift. Snow whipped around them like shards of glass. Kane fired again, the shot missing by inches. Ethan tackled him, both men crashing into the snow beside the landing gear. The rotor wash screamed overhead, the cold air slicing through them. Kane struck with surprising strength, his gloved fist catching Ethan across the jaw. "You should have stayed in your cabin," he hissed. Ethan spat blood into the snow. "You should have stayed buried." They struggled, rolling toward the edge of the ridge. The ground beneath them cracked, a shallow overhang of ice ready to give way. Shadow barked wildly from above, pacing at the cliff's edge. Claire shouted something, but her words were lost in the roar of the helicopter. Kane drew a knife, its blade glinting cold blue. He swung once, catching Ethan across the arm. Pain shot through him, sharp and white-hot. Ethan gripped Kane's wrist, forcing the blade away inch by inch until his muscles screamed. Then, with one final surge, he drove his shoulder into Kane's chest. The knife fell. Kane stumbled backward, right onto the breaking ice. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Kane's calm and resigned, Ethan's blazing with quiet fury. The ridge gave way beneath them. Snow and ice collapsed in a roaring avalanche, swallowing both men as the helicopter veered away in panic. "Ethan!" Claire's scream tore through the wind. She and Corbin scrambled to the edge, but all they saw was the white abyss below, the avalanche racing into the valley. Shadow howled, the sound raw and human in its grief. Minutes passed before movement stirred below. A dark shape emerged from the snow, a man dragging himself upward, battered, bloodied, alive. Ethan. His left arm hung limp, his face pale with exhaustion. Behind him, half buried under ice, Kane lay still, eyes open to the dawn. Ethan climbed the last few feet before collapsing to his knees, gasping. Shadow rushed to him, pressing his muzzle against Ethan's chest, whining softly. Claire dropped beside him, her eyes wet, relief breaking her hardened expression. "You stubborn bastard," she whispered. Ethan managed a faint smile. "Takes one to know one." As the sun finally broke through the clouds, light spilled over the valley, painting the wreckage in gold. The fire had died, the snow still fell, and yet, somehow, the world felt clean again. Later that week, reports of the explosion reached the state police. Captain Harris was declared dead in custody. The Iron Serpents were dismantled through DEA raids coordinated from Corbin's intel. And in a small corner of Redwood Falls, life began to move again. Ethan refused medals or interviews. He rebuilt the cabin with his own hands. The burn marks on the walls now part of its story. Olivia visited often, bringing supplies and quiet conversation. Claire stayed longer, helping file reports, then walking shadow along the frozen trails at dusk. She had scars now, both seen and unseen, but when she looked at Ethan, there was something new behind her guarded eyes. Peace, maybe, or something close to it. One evening, as the last light bled across the snow, Ethan stood outside with Shadow watching the horizon. "You think they'll ever stop coming?" he asked softly. Claire stepped beside him, her breath a pale mist in the cold. "Evil doesn't stop," she said, "but neither do we." And in that fragile silence between them, as night reclaimed the mountains, the veteran and his loyal dog finally found what they had been fighting for all along. Not victory, but the right to rest. Sometimes, miracles don't come as thunder in the sky or angels with open wings. Sometimes they come quietly, in the shape of a wounded soldier who refuses to give up, a loyal dog who keeps watch through the storm, or a stranger who chooses compassion over fear. In the frozen silence of Redwood Falls, God did not speak through fire or voice. He spoke through endurance, through mercy, through the hearts that refused to let evil win. Ethan's survival wasn't just luck, it was grace, the kind that moves unseen through every breath we take. The storm may have buried blood, fire, and pain beneath the snow, but it also uncovered something greater. Forgiveness, loyalty, and the reminder that even in the darkest winters, light always finds a way home. So if this story touched you, remember, your miracle might be waiting in a moment of kindness, a prayer whispered in fear, or a second chance you didn't expect. Never stop believing that God still works in quiet ways, through ordinary hands, and through hearts that dare to love again. May God bless every soul who watches and believes. If this story moved your heart, leave a comment, Tell us where you're watching from. Share it with someone who needs hope. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and redemption. Because sometimes, the smallest story can be someone's greatest miracle.